For those of you who follow my videos, let me just get rid of this QuickTime screen recording thingy. You may have noticed that I've gone back and forth on various technologies throughout the years, including Linux. Now, first of all, there's something that needs to be cleared up. It's not Linux. Linux is the kernel, which is the piece of software that allocates system resources to various programs. Without a kernel, you're basically dead in the water. From my understanding, it's like having a crew without a captain. Anyway, so Linux is the kernel. The rest of the operating system is GNU, G-N-U. GNU's not Unix. It's a recursive acronym. For those of you who use GNU/Linux, perhaps one that is not entirely free software, and we'll get to that in a moment because we can see here free is in freedom. We'll get to that in a moment. If you're using a version of GNU/Linux that's not entirely free, you may have run across an application called Wine. That's also a recursive acronym. Wine is not an emulator. That is basically what it stands for. So what's all the fuss about GNU/Linux? Well, remember we just mentioned free is in freedom. I've had issues where, even with an authorized copy, we've had issues with our computers. For instance, I had to get a copy of something printed that was an important document on my relative's Windows computer. Well, guess what? The document opened just fine, but because it wasn't a specific, the PDF only wanted to open in a specific application that seemed to be Microsoft-centric, and it wouldn't send the print command at all. I don't know why, it just wouldn't. That's one example. Another example I'm having right now has to do with Macintosh OS X's versions. Now, supposedly, you might be able to turn this off. I haven't gotten to that yet, okay? So if you can turn it off, realize that I haven't done that yet if you can. But if you can't, then this is what I'm talking about. What we have here is an issue where versions, once it's saved, that's it. You cannot save as under a different file name. And I was trying to do that for a school project so I wouldn't get it confused with a prior attempt with another project. But the third one that I do remember for sure is not being able to transfer songs, particularly songs that I purchased from iTunes. I could not transfer them in 2007 when I got my MacBook, from my iMac to my MacBook, without having to go through some hurdles. I was originally trying to have them come over from, what was I trying to do? I think I was trying to put them on a hard drive and it wouldn't let me. Anyway, those are examples of restricted use of authorized copies. Free software would not allow for this. Now, with the free software, we have the 4 freedoms. The 4 freedoms are freedom 0. Now, for those of you wondering, 0, if you are into programming at all, now I've got some programming experience in JavaScript this term, and I'm dipping into Python a little bit, and I'd like to get further into Python. But if you remember your arrays, a value starts with 0 and not 1. So freedom 0, the freedom to run the software as you wish. Remember how I told you about those little hiccups that we had, where it wouldn't print or it wouldn't allow me to transfer music? Freedom 0 allows me to run the program as I wish, not as the proprietary developer wishes. Freedom 1, the freedom to study the source code and change it to make the program do what you wish. Because I have some JavaScript experience, I am able to go in and take a look at the source code of web pages and web apps and go in, and I haven't made changes to it obviously, but if I wanted to, I could. So says freedom 1 of the 4 freedoms for free software. Freedom 2. This one, along with freedom 0, would be the most important for people who do not know how to program. Freedom 2 is the freedom to redistribute exact copies. Let's say, for instance, somebody wanted a copy of software XYZ, and it's a great program, but they don't have the money, but they know you have a copy. Would you be willing to give it to them? Well, because of the proprietary software license, you've got two choices. You either break the license agreement and give it to them, or you don't help them. Freedom 2 within free software eliminates this issue, and you can go ahead and be a good citizen and help out your friend. Freedom 3, freedom to distribute your modified copies. Remember, we talked about Freedom 1, how you can study and change the source code if you're willing to, if you're already a programmer or you're looking into learning programming. Freedom 1 is essential because free software, you can study the source code, change it to make it do what you wish. Freedom 3, you can take the modified copy that you just made and distribute it. Now, before anybody asks, these are not requirements. You don't have to do any of these things. But if you want to, you should be able to. That's the whole point behind the 4 freedoms. Now, originally, I was not too keen on a completely free operating system of GNU/Linux because of lack of accessibility. Well, accessibility and Flash. They've overcome 2 of those. First of all, GNASH, the GNU Shockwave Flash player, is up and running, and it works beautifully with YouTube. No setup required. It's in this particular distribution, and you're ready to go. Also, it's accessible. I don't necessarily need the magnifier per se, as long as I can have speech telling me what's under my mouse. It's either has to be telling me what's under my mouse or magnification, one of the two. This particular version of Linux called Trisquel, Trisquel 5.5, Brigantia. It's a version of GNU/Linux, which is free software, and it's accessible. In the boot menu, you will see try GNU/Linux without installing. I apologize for stumbling there. You want to go to that, and you want the option that says plus accessibility. What that does is that starts the screen reader immediately. And the last time I tried that, it stuttered and it crashed. This time, and that was with Linux, which is not a completely free operating system. This time, no problems. This is under GNOME 3.2, the desktop environment, GNOME 3.2. Everything works beautifully. I ticked the little checkbox that allows me to have Orca announce what's under the mouse, and so far so good. So those are several of the main hurdles. If anybody's interested, you want to go to Trisquel, Trisquel.info, You want to download, now listen very carefully, this is very important, Trisquel 5.5 Brigantia, Brigantia, I think. The version you want, this is the big one, the version you want is i18n. i18n. Do not get the i386 or the x64. If you get those, accessibility will not be turned on by default. i18n is the only one. It's a little bit bigger than the others. It's about a gig and a half. But what that gives you is turnkey accessibility along with NVIDIA graphics. If anybody has NVIDIA graphics cards, thanks to the Nuovo driver that's available as free software, you can now run more intense graphic applications with an NVIDIA cards. So I'm actually looking at doing this. I've got Trisquel GNU/Linux. Kind of looks like this. This is an older version, but the newer one's very similar. Trisquel GNU/Linux. And I'd like to run it on a Toshiba Satellite Alpha 105. There's one problem. Like I said, I'm able to play Flash videos and I'm able to get the speech up. The only reason I'm able to know about the Flash videos is because I've been running it in a virtual machine. In terms of running it on actual hardware, there's one very important obstacle, and that would be this. The Intel WM3945 ABG wireless card. There are no free drivers for Intel cards, which basically means I'm going to need to pick up a USB dongle, preferably, either USB or Express card, one of the two, and Express card is practically dead. So I prefer USB, particularly for an 802.11n connection. But I contacted the Free Software Foundation, and they recommended Atheros, which is the most widely supported. I've never heard of the Atheros brand. I don't know if there are any Atheros devices available in the stores. I know Amazon's got it for 25 bucks, so I may look into that. But if anybody out there has any question, any issue, any suggestion, I'd like to hear it. Now, given these examples, there's definitely a reason to push for free software. The other thing is software patents. Now, in case you're wondering, look at Apple and look at Samsung, look at HTC, look at Microsoft. Everybody's suing each other left and right over petty differences. Software patents have allowed this to happen. It has also made it hazardous for developers. Now, like I said, I've got some development experience in JavaScript, and I'd like to take that further. But if you want to implement something, you need to check and see, if you're going to redistribute it publicly anymore, you practically have to look you have to turn your head before turning a corner and make sure there's no patent with it. Otherwise, you may need to get a license, and it's just made things very hectic. So, but no, that's basically what I'm looking at doing is to run GNU/Linux free software on my Toshiba. If anybody has any comments on how I can get around the Wi-Fi problem, the other thing I'm also considering to do that, by the way, is to get a wireless extender bridge that can plug into the Ethernet port on the back of the computer and just use that, because my router is in another part of the house from where I am. Otherwise, I'd just plug it in directly and that'd be the end of that. But where it is, it's kind of difficult to do that. So if anybody knows if an extender bridge would work, I could just pick one of those up. But if anybody has any suggestions on that, thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.